Coraline from 2009. This release predated home 3D by a couple of years. As such, 3D collectors have to be careful what edition of the Blu-ray they are buying. The first print Blu-rays were advertised as 3D, but they were the anaglyph version. Happily, it was re-released as 3D TVs came out, and at least in my parts, I remember copies of Coraline being displayed everywhere they sold TVs. In some parts, I wouldn't be surprised to learn if it was the first thing people watched on their brand new 3D home systems, especially if they had kids. For me, it sits along The Nightmare Before Christmas as the best stop-motion movie ever made. It was nominated for Best Picture, but lost. Coraline and Nightmare were directed by the same person. However, Coraline is not a musical, and although told very simply, its effect on the viewer cannot be described as straightforward at all. As one of my movie buddies remarked after a recent screening, I've seen this dozens of times, but always get something new out of it. Somehow the movie manages something of a biblical quality, where the same passage can mean different things, not just to different people, but even to the same person at different stages of their life. It was not only filmed in 3D, but you might say it was written in 3D. It was designed from the ground up to be a 3D movie. It's a story of two worlds, and between these worlds is a long, expanding tunnel that really only exists because they were making a stereo movie. In the book, there is no tunnel. The transition is either instant or described as simply dark. It has occasional in-your-face moments, 3D ham as I like to call it, such as these hands coming out at you, a classic 3D moment if there ever was one. Or perhaps some feet flying down on top of you, a bit quick to fully appreciate, but it keeps you alert. Now, curiously, all this never feels gimmicky. It never felt to me like it was a 3D movie, despite being built from the ground up to use the effect. The reason for this subtle feel is that the stereo is being used as an authoring tool. It's dialed down for a significant portion of the movie, only really coming alive when we go through the portal into the magical mirror world. There are a handful of movies that do something similar with 3D, where the 3D is only turned on for select scenes, usually to coincide with a mood change or a flashback. But thankfully, Coraline never removes the 3D entirely, which helps keep it from feeling like a gimmick. There are no glasses on, glasses off cue. We are already immersed in a stereo world and merely watch it expand. It works hand in hand with the colors of the dream world, so there isn't this feeling of it being turned on so much that we're just having a vivid dream, which in a way we are. To my surprise, I learned that the expansion of the 3D effect was not done solely with the cameras, but also the sets. For the real world, they were built and painted in such a way as to purposely obscure and dull the stereo effect, which kind of puts a 3D aficionado, such as myself, in an awkward position. On one hand, I always want to see the best and most exciting eye separation. On the other hand, the effect has nothing to say if it's always at maximum. I can't have my cake and eat it too. Drawing back the effect also helps keep the eye from becoming accustomed to it. So it's just as exciting to see pop at the end of the movie as it was in the beginning. And while we are in the real world land, they do give us an occasional item pushed in our face to help keep our stereo senses alive. And this initial world is not without its fun. The windows in particular are always fascinating, always a bit dirty and having some reflection. I often found my eyes going toward them. This reflection moment through the snow globes are also fun. I am curious if the refraction was a practical effect or if they used CGI for it. Not to mention the sparkles. How would they get that done in stop motion? But of course, these are but appetizers. The real show happens in the other land where you don't really need pop-outs to be amusing. The sets just fantastically come alive in stereo. But also fascinating is a moment where the stereo world starts to fall apart and the colors shift from vivid to black and white. And it's fun to see the effect of that on the impression that we are getting from the stereo, because they don't adjust the stereo, they just let the color fade. Now, the whole thing is based on a book which is only about 160 pages if you remove the forward and extraneous material. So I gave it a read. For anyone learning about screenwriting, this makes for a great study in book adaptation. For starters, the book is so short that it's an easy review. And secondly, there's a fascinating amount of material presented very early on in the book that are used in the movie as major dramatic reveals in its later half. And there are other ideas that are preserved but artfully rearranged for drama. Forget Best Animated Picture. This really deserved a screenwriting award. One example of this rearrangement is the cat at one point tersely ruminates about how he doesn't require a name, or what is the point of a name, where in the book this comes from the ghosts that have been trapped so long they forgot who or even what they were, and they're even curious what the point of a name was to begin with. The portion of the novel dedicated to the ghosts is also interesting. It's not like they're eliminated from the movie, but their role is made so succinct, so to the point, so polished, that they become almost invisible to the plot, despite being very intrinsic to it. There are many interpretations of this movie, as I earlier mentioned, and they're all valid, but I think what is overlooked is what makes this movie so inviting to interpretation is not that it is unique, but that it is very standard. Any book on script writing will in some fashion describe a movie as encompassing these points, which can be roughly described as an existing world, which is disrupted, then it's explored, then dealt with using habits learned in the old world, which prove unsatisfactory, new things are learned or accepted, and this either repairs or makes livable the new world. About 7 points. And what you'll notice in those points is that movies are about dealing with change, getting plucked from one garden and dropped into another, and if you'll pardon the allegory, we then follow the character as they name the new animals. That is to say, a main source of conflict is how a character interprets the world they find themselves living in. And often this type of story beat gets a bit blurry. The so-called new world is usually psychological in nature. For example, home stops being home if there's an intruder. In Coraline, though, we actually do visit another world that looks like the first world. The character is actually exploring. So the usually hidden framework of a script about how we identify and relate to things are brought very front and center. And this has a most magical effect of coercing the viewer into writing their own script while they watch, to imagine or reflect on how things look different after change. It's actually a 4D movie because you really watch it from 3 eyes, left, right, and the one in the mind.